Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. It's episode 68 today. We're excited to be with you Friday, July 30th of 2021. Today, it's going to be a fun little show. We're in between because, as you know, the last 2 weeks we did something in cooperation with MedHealth about the state of COVID, talked with a lot of doctors. It was really cool. In August, we're going to be talking medical device manufacturing. But in this 1 week in between, we thought we would do a fun little show. We're going to do COVID Connect as we always do, the COVID news. After that, some FDA education on throwing the red flag, a new option for FDA review that's relatively new in the last couple of years. After that, Q&A and community check-ins. And after that, something kind of fun. We're going to show you Michigan, our dear state, from a different perspective. That'll be a fun little piece. But let's get to the local news first. What we have here is a reminder that the last 2 weeks, in partnership with MedHealth, we did 2 special episodes, one on COVID vaccines, boosters, and variants, and the other on the Detroit-Windsor and really the U.S.-Canada relationship, the economic relationship that's been there for years, as well as what COVID has meant to and will continue to mean to that border crossing. So you can find those episodes through the website or on YouTube, as well as all of our past episodes. Have a look, and we hope you enjoy those. I really did enjoy doing those interviews. Also, a reminder about our pitch party, the $2,500 quarterly pitch party. The next one coming up in September. We'll have the pitches in September with the prizes or the prize awarded at the end of the month. And again, it's a pitch party, not a pitch competition. We want to have people talk about these companies and say what they liked, what they didn't like. Our judges do that review. Any U.S. MedTech company is eligible. They get 10 minutes at the end of a show to present their pitch, and it should contain the areas of problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and their ask. And if they want to participate, they can send a pitch deck to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org. And then at the end of the month, our judges will judge each of those 10-minute pitches, Andy Rader, Nikki Kennedy, Jim Metzger, and Stacy Frankovich, and come up with a winner, one that they wanted to tip their hat to for the day. And that company will receive from Into Being $2,500. And some of those prizes that we've awarded in the past have really been instrumental in getting some small startups off the ground for their first steps. So we're kind of excited about that. But there are our judges, and that's all about the pitch party coming up in September. Next up, COVID metrics and vaccine distribution. All of our data these days coming from covid.cdc.gov. And I want to tell you, there's a really cool new chart that the CDC is now adding to their state summaries. This is a really neat one. We're going to pay attention to this one as time passes. This is COVID-19 reported cases per 100,000 population and percent of total population that's been vaccinated. So this is going to be, or been fully vaccinated, I should say. It's going to be really, really interesting. As we're about to tell you, Michigan is coming up in the numbers, cases, deaths, and hospitalizations all heading north. The numbers are still small, but they are heading in a not good direction. And this is going to show us what does by county, what do the cases look like versus vaccinations? So a really interesting graphic. If you've got a gray square, it means that a low percentage of that county's population has been vaccinated, but they haven't had many cases. A green square indicates that a county has had a high rate of vaccination, but also a low number of cases. A dark square shows that they have gotten a lot of vaccines, but they've had a high number of cases. And a red square indicates that they've got a low number of vaccines, but a high number of cases. And so this is going to be a really, really interesting map to watch. Kudos to whoever at CDC came up with this one. It's going to be a great graphic to watch. Right now, not a lot to say. Most counties are kind of in that middle-ish range on both counts. We have one way northwest in the state, which is fully, very highly vaccinated, but also very high case rates. We have one down south in the state that very low rates of vaccination and also high case rates, but too early to say, but a great, great graphic to be watching as we go forward. As I mentioned, the news, not great. The numbers in raw numbers are low, but the percentage increases are high. Uh, there's now, I think, 32 COVID deaths. It's a big percentage jump. Hospital admissions are going up against a low, but going up, and cases obviously jumping as well. Community transmission level moderate. And so we'll see where this goes in the state of Michigan. Michigan had a wave recently enough, it dropped down. Then we saw the South explode, and now Michigan appears to be coming back as well. Here's the vaccine doses administered by date of administration, and that peak and drop off, these two almost straight lines, this meteoric rise and then fall. Now, though, since the month of July, evening out. We've hit a plateau, we've hit a constant rate of daily vaccinations, so it doesn't appear at the moment that that's going to drop any lower. We shall see where that heads in the future. A little bit of news out of Israel. Of course, Israel does a great job of tracking their population. And the Israeli data from the New York Times here in this case, but the Lancet has this, all the other major news outlets. Israeli data suggests possible waning in effectiveness of Pfizer vaccine. We alluded to this the other week on the show. This does not mean that the vaccine doesn't work. What this means is that there's still very, very strong protection against large adverse events from contracting the disease. So you're probably not getting hospitalized, you're probably not dying from it, but diminished effectiveness against infection. That number perhaps as low as 39%, the numbers coming from June and July, which means if you've been vaccinated, that's great. You are likely very, very protected. The question then becomes, can you get the disease and can you transmit it? And that answer is looking more like yes. But again, to reemphasize, in both time periods, however, the shot was more than 90% effective in preventing severe disease. So that's great. And of course, Pfizer, one of the leading vaccines on the market at the moment. Also, I want to bring this to your attention. It's been an increasing point of discussion how polarized the subject of COVID can be. And as you know, we like to stay away from those polarized ends. We like to talk what the data is. We're very thankful to the doctors and clinicians who've come on the show and by and large have really, really talked nuance. They've talked what the data actually says. We have been so appreciative of that. Slate News Magazine has brought this article, which I tell you, I think you got to go read it. It's spot on, very, very nonpartisan, equal opportunity abuse for those who participate in this form of argument. They call the article "The Noble Lies of COVID-19." And the question they lead with is, do we want public health officials to report facts and uncertainties transparently, or do we want them to shape information to influence the public to take specific actions? Their argument, and you got to know, this is not a historically, well, shall we say, anti-government news outlet. What they're saying is they have very credible evidence where the government has taken action specifically to affect outcomes without telling the truth. So even though the outcome desired is a good one and a noble one, what they chart in this article is how the government, through the past two administrations, has broken trust with the people, and why that is a part of why we are where we are today. I read this, thought it was spot on. Again, very, very nonpartisan, but really gets to the bottom of why we're seeing some of the problems that we're seeing, at least in your humble correspondent's opinion. So I hope you'll take a look at that from Slate. That is all the COVID news for today. Next up, we're going to do some FDA education. Today, throwing the least burdensome flag. Didn't know that you had the opportunity to throw a flag when it comes to FDA, but in fact, as of the last couple years, this is becoming an option for medical devices under 510K review. The information in this little presentation that we're going to do is based on an FDA webinar that was presented in 2019. There's a transcript of it available. It's kind of terse and hard to get through, so we're going to break it down for you. But in that webinar, they covered the least burdensome provisions, concepts, and principles, final guidance. Well, what a winning title. But to understand what this is all about, we have to understand this concept of least burdensome. Now, you've heard us on the show many times talk about the FDA's 510K process. The process is for the clearance of a medical device based on substantial equivalence to a predicate device, that is, a device that's already legally marketed. So if your device does kind of what that device does, you're likely eligible to submit for a 510K and to demonstrate that your device is substantially equivalent to that predicate device. Now, you've got to have the same intended use for the device. You've got to have similar technological characteristics, or you've at least got to make sure that the technological characteristics don't raise new questions of safety or efficacy. But the 510K is not primarily about a safety and efficacy pathway, like a PMA or a de novo would be. It's about substantial equivalence to a predicate device that's already on the market. Well, this process has gone through all sorts of ups and downs, but oftentimes companies will find themselves at odds with their reviewer, where they just can't come to terms, and they disagree on some of the fundamentals. FDA has recognized that they should be pursuing the least burdensome approach to regulatory oversight. Now, this is kind of similar. Maybe you've done a tax document, and you've noticed that there is a note at the bottom that says, this document should take you so many minutes to complete. And the point is that the government is trying, and they're at least making lip service towards the idea that this shouldn't take more time, more effort than is necessary. And in 1997, the FDA came out with the least burdensome provisions, and they've been updating them ever since. So the term least burdensome indicates the minimum required information that would support a determination of substantial equivalence for a 510K or a reasonable assurance of device safety and effectiveness. At surface, that's a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. We're thankful that the agency is thinking that way, because what they're saying is, we're going to go on record as saying that we don't have the right to drag you through anything. We do have the right to ask you questions, but you should be able to answer those questions in the way that is least burdensome and still demonstrates substantial equivalence and safety and effectiveness. Now, it's important to realize that none of these provisions change the standards for pre-market approval or substantial equivalence. So this doesn't mean that you get to do less just because you want to do less. The questions can be the same, the basic answers can be the same, but this is a question of how efficient can we make that process? How little can we ask for and still get to the same conclusion? So here are 7 least burdensome principles. On the first slide there are 4, on the second slide there are 3. The first, FDA says that they intend to request the minimum information necessary to adequately address the regulatory question or issue at hand. That's great, and it's something that we can remind the agency of if they ever lose sight of this. It's also the case that industry, now this one's about industry, not about the agency, should submit material, including pre-market submissions to the FDA, that are least burdensome for FDA to review. So the agency is saying, we intend to ask you for the minimum necessary, but would you please give us only what's really necessary? And if you've ever seen a submission that was hastily put together without an understanding of what the agency's actual issues are, you'll see all sorts of things thrown in willy-nilly, without any indexing, without any explanation, without any references. And the agency really does want to see a well put together submission where they can find the information they're looking for, and that you point to the salient parts of your submission in relevant sections. So the process of indexing that 510K submission can be not quite as important, but almost as important as what goes into it itself, so the agency can find the information they need. Number 3, FDA intends to use the most efficient means to resolve regulatory questions and issues. So they're going to try to be as efficient as they can. Again, it's important to realize that we can remind the agency of this if we feel that they are not doing this, either informally or, as we'll talk in a moment, a little bit more formally. This one is gold and needs to be used more. FDA intends to, and industry should, consider the use of post-market data collection to reduce pre-market data collection wherever appropriate and feasible. So this means that there are times when it's appropriate for the agency to ask for information before the device goes to market, but there's also times when the agency is right in wanting that information, but they should ask for it after the device has been cleared to the market. I remember pre-COVID, there was a conference that many of us were at, and Dr. Jeff Shuren, who is the very visionary head of CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, was sitting on a panel with someone from Center for Medicare Medicaid Reimbursement. And this person from Medicare Medicaid wanted every device to be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, and Dr. Shuren made the very, very perceptive comment, every device we clear to the market is an investigational device. It's impossible to understand everything that could happen with a device. And so the agency does fundamentally recognize that it's appropriate to ask some questions pre-market and some questions post-market. And just to know, as a company bringing your device to market, that you can have that discussion with FDA, which parts of this data collection will be pre-market, which parts will be post-market. It's an important thing to realize. Number 5, the regulatory approaches should be designed to fit the technology. And if you think about it, this is completely appropriate because a device that is high risk, very invasive, is probably going to require more regulatory oversight than a device that is less risky. Or a device that uses different technology. Software is going to need to be regulated in different ways than hardware is going to need to be regulated. And as we've talked many times on the show and with some of our friends who are working on smart software, intelligent devices, it's really hard to understand how should this be regulated, especially when the device is responsive to data it gets. It's not just a pre-canned algorithm that does the same thing every time. And this creates regulatory challenges. Number 6, FDA intends to leverage data from other countries and decisions by or on behalf of other national medical device regulatory authorities where appropriate and feasible. I think those of us who have been through this process know that this is one of the more far-reaching aspirations, and often this is challenged widely. You may have data in other countries, but the agency doesn't feel that it's appropriate. That one is probably the furthest out on these list of aspirations, but still worth knowing. It's something we can remind the agency of as opportunities arise. And number 7, the FDA intends to actively engage in the development, recognition, and use of voluntary consensus standards published by international and other standards development organizations. Well, and if you've worked with the agency, you know that's largely true. They do largely use international standards. They consensus them. They don't do it blindly. They have committees that look at the appropriateness of a standard. Sometimes a new standard comes out, and it does take them time to adopt the new version. That's okay. They are putting the time and the effort in, and it's good to see them using consensus standards. So these are the least burdensome principles, having evolved since 1997. It's great to have these, to have FDA saying, yes, in principle, we hold to these, and you can remind us of them. Now, of course, you can do that informally. You can reach to your reviewer. You can reach to their management and say that. Does it always happen like it should? Of course not. No, it doesn't always happen like it should. But this does give us the opportunity to get out there and remind folks when it doesn't. Now, wouldn't it be great if, beyond these recognitions, beyond the rules of the game, if there was a way to have a referee step in to do something about it if you felt like it wasn't going right? Somebody to throw a flag. Well, it turns out that you, the submitting company, can actually throw a flag. Now, you're not the impartial referee, so it's not quite as nice as having a third-party ref in the game. But it's better than nothing, and it's an option that should really be considered. So after a pilot test of this, the FDA implemented the least burdensome flag in March of 2019 for all 510K submissions. So this is now an option for any 510K submission if you feel like things are going sideways. What does it mean? Here's some things you should know. After the FDA makes an information request or a deficiency statement where there's a potential not substantially equivalent decision on the table. So, like, let's say this doesn't apply to a pre-submission with the agency. It's not a regulatory decision. They're not going to come back and say, we've decided your device is not substantially equivalent to its predicate as a part of a pre-sub. You're just chatting with the agency. It's not a regulatory decision. But if you're engaged in a 510K and things aren't looking good and the agency is making motions like, oh, if you can't answer this, we don't see how this is equivalent, then it may be fodder for a flag to be thrown. Now, you can't just throw the flag. You need to discuss your concerns with the review staff. Give them a chance to address your concerns. That's their job. They should be doing it. But part of the reason the flag is there is because the agency wanted more visibility into whether they were implementing least burdensome provisions, a way to report back to Congress and say we either are doing well or we're not. And that's part of the reason this flag was created. If you can't resolve the issue with your reviewer, you have to throw the flag within 60 days of the deficiency notice. So you only have 60 days, and you can't cover more than 2 topic areas. So let's say that you care a lot about biocompatibility and a lot about sterility, and you care about electrical safety, and you see that all 3 of those issues are ones that could really matter. Well, you got to pick your top 2. They say to limit it to no more than 2 topic areas. And don't think the flag is a way to pause the clock because you're running out of time because you mismanaged your timeline. It doesn't change the due date of the responses. So it can't be used at the last minute to extend a filing deadline. You've got to really need the information and use it early, and then it gives you some cool options. So after exhausting your other options, after you've talked to the review staff, and you still have 60 days, you haven't run out 60 days on the clock after the deficiency or the request for new information, what you need to do is to email the lead reviewer, their manager, and the 510K review staff about 1 to 2 pages of information, including a summary of the deficiencies being flagged, so the deficiencies that you're flagging, why the request that the agency made is not least burdensome, or the submitter is being held to a different review standard. If you believe that you're being asked for something that's not really the 510K review standard, which, believe it or not, does happen, you need a summary of the relevant communications with the signatory authority or their manager to show that the submitter has sought management input before throwing the flag, and you need to tell them what you think the proposed path forward should be. If you do these things, FDA will, first of all, they'll attempt to resolve the flag internally. They'll review it, and if they think you're right, they're not going to come back and necessarily discuss it with you. They might just change their opinion. That would be a nice outcome. Assuming there is something to talk about, they will respond to the submitter. There may be discussions to be had there, and they will include the flag in the administrative record, so it'll be on record that you didn't think that their review of your process was fair. And it'll give you some options there. It's a way to do it. Now, can you do this informally? Of course you can. The division chiefs and the assistant division chiefs and all the reviewers and everybody else, their phone numbers are available from the FDA website. You can talk to them, you can reach out to them, and there are often times when this is informally appropriate to do. It's a complete option there. But when the challenge gets a little more, what this really does is it gives you a step before appeal to take formal action. If FDA comes back and says your device is not substantially equivalent, at that point your choice is an appeal. Get the lawyers involved, tell them why they're wrong, but it's like water under the bridge at that point. And so throwing the flag gives you a formal option before the appeal is your final option. Now, a few caveats. This doesn't address the fundamental disagreements about what is required with respect to substantial equivalence or safety and efficacy, right? So if the agency has a question and their question is scientifically valid, it's technologically valid, this doesn't mean that you get away from their question. It just means that you get to discuss what the least burdensome way to answer the question is. For example, if they're asking for clinical data and it's clear to you that there are easy ways to answer the very question that they're asking without clinical data, then it gives you an option to reach out to them and hope that you will be able to use the least burdensome pathway. Another caveat, the flag won't necessarily help too much if management is already involved. If somehow management got involved all the way up to the division chief, and this has happened in our experience, then there's really not anyone else to go to. So if you throw the flag at that point, you're doing it because you want this to be on record, that you feel that entire division is doing the wrong thing with respect to your device. Now, a common question is, will this sour the FDA on you? Will this give a bad taste in their mouth on your company? And of course, that's always something to worry about. I think it's one reason people might hesitate to throw the flag. But in reality, this is a pathway that they've put out there, that they have requested that people use. They've talked it up, and I think they do want it used. So reserve it for those times when there really is a disagreement about the least burdensome pathway to get data out there. And it's another tool to have in the arsenal. It's another important thing to know about. And this one, of course, just 2 years old, 2 and maybe and a quarter years old. So things to know about in the world of FDA. At this point, we're going to pause for just a second and see if there are any questions relative to the least burdensome flag and how to throw that if that's something that you want to do for your 510K submission. Maybe you have a question about your 510K submission that is going a little bit sideways and you'd like to talk about it. We'd be happy to do that now. We're going to give just a few seconds to do that before we move on. That's our good friend Ken Spencer with U of M MCERT. Ken, how you doing?
I'm good, Gene. Thanks. So is this only apply to a 510K submission, or suppose you're going for a de novo classification?
That's a great question. I didn't check on the de novos, Ken. I'll have to follow up on that with you. It does clearly apply that they made it specifically apply to 510Ks. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a direct answer to that right now, but we'll get an answer back to you on that one. That's a very, very good question, because they are opening the pathway to say that, hey guys, you're not doing this as efficiently as you could be. There's no reason it shouldn't apply to a de novo as well, but we'll check in on that for you. Great question. We got a question from Jillian here. Does it apply to special 510Ks? There's nothing that we've read that says that it would not apply to a special 510K. It appears to apply to the program broadly for 510Ks. And of course, the review standard is substantial equivalence. And oftentimes that's what you need to be arguing with the agency, is that, hey guys, you are moving outside of something that is the review standard for the 510K program. So yeah, there's no reason that it should not apply to special 510Ks, Jillian. Thanks for that question. We'll pause for another minute more and see what other questions may be here. Great questions, though. And all of these things are tools in the toolbox, right? This is not something where you say, oh, we're going to go out there and we're going to throw this every time. And in fact, the uses are limited, but it's important to recognize what your options are. We were part of a FDA training call just a few weeks ago, the FDA's Ready conference, and it just struck me once again how the FDA expects interactions, right? They understand that not all their reviewers are approaching this correctly. Many of them are underpaid and overworked, and many of them are fresh out of their PhD program. They have a zeal to protect public health, and that is wonderful, but they often approach it in a way that can be, more like a review committee, like a PhD review committee, than folks that are trying to protect public health and trying to get devices cleared to the market. And of course, if you don't have the business background, if you don't have the clinical background, it can be hard to rightly judge what is appropriate. And so the agency continues to make clear that they want to be contacted, whether through these formal means or through informal means. You can find your directors and your chiefs Contact information on the FDA website. Well, my apologies. We've got the frog in the throat today. The last few weeks, we've had the benefit of the interviewees, the wonderful interviewees, and today I'm doing the show all on my own, and I'm not used to talking this much. So hope everyone's sorry about that. We'll leave it open for questions for just a moment more. Some great questions thus far. But if you got a question about 510Ks, about the flag, please throw them out there. Otherwise, we have one more topic that we're going to talk about today. And also, I want to open it up. If anyone has any announcements for community events, this would be the time to do it before we do one special interest piece here at the end. It's going to be a little bit shorter show today. But if you have any community announcements, feel free to bring those out. We'd look forward to hearing from you on those. And I'll remind you that in the month of August, we're hoping to talk manufacturing with all of you. FDA medical device manufacturing. It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. There's lots of misconceptions. And also lots of cool manufacturers. We will focus on those in the great state of Michigan, but it'll give you an idea of what you should be thinking about as you talk to manufacturers. So we'll look forward to that in the month of August. Well, with that, what I want to do, this is going to be kind of fun, and it'll finish out what's going to be a relatively short show today before we get to our month of August. You know that we love our great state of Michigan, and we generally try to focus on it through the lens of MedTech. Sometimes things are just too much fun and too cool, and we got to tell you about it anyways. And I want to tell you what I did last weekend. We got to see Michigan, our great state, from a different perspective. Hope this gives you a realization of just how beautiful this wonderful state that we live in is. What a great place to live and work and take care of people. And as we like to do it, into being developed medical devices for human health. So some friends and I got the opportunity, many of you know that one of my hobbies is paramotoring, flying these crazy lawn chair / lawnmower contraptions around the skies of our beautiful state. And a couple friends and I had the opportunity to do this all the way from Indiana to the Mackinac Bridge, about 500 miles up the west coast of Michigan. I have now seen every square inch of that wonderful west coast of our state, and I have to tell you, I'm impressed. It makes me proud to live here. It took us 2.5 days over 8 flight legs to do this trip, and it was absolutely incredible. As we leave you today, I want to give you just a little glimpse of what that west coast looks like from 10 or 20 or 1,000 feet in the air. Here's a little video for your viewing enjoyment. Couldn't help but share that. It's such a beautiful state, beautiful West Coast. You could be forgiven for thinking that we were flying in the tropics. If you have never gotten up and over the waters of especially northern western Michigan, you are in for a surprise. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. And it's amazing to think we have it right here in the Midwest. We do have a Q&A here popping up. And this one from Michael, quick question I am sure would be better asked for the manufacturers. Can you explain how to obtain a device classification letter? And I'm just, Michael, maybe you can clarify what your need is there. I imagine that's for import export. Can you clarify that to us? And actually, Michael, I'm just going to make your mic live here if you are interested. Let's see if we can do that here.
Hey, Gene.
There we are,
there?
Michael. How's it going today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for your question and thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, and you know, I was talking to a potential manufacturer, and they said that I think if you remember, I have the CPAP thing, and
Yes.
and they told me that I need a device classification letter to get it to start manufacturing. To start, and it's a kind of one-stop shop where they, you know, a medical device development company. And they said, well, that I would need a device classification letter to classify my device and I don't know, I really didn't understand why, but I thought I might just ask you if you knew of anybody who does that, or that might be a good question to ask the manufacturers if you need one to start manufacturing.
That's a great question, Mike. And the reason I brought you on is I wanted to know if it was based on import-export or just based on this. And it sounds like it's not for import-export.
Right.
What they're probably saying, and I don't know for sure, but what they're probably saying is, so the regulatory requirements and the design requirements and design controls and things we've talked about a lot on the show depend on what the classification of the device is.
Mm-hmm.
So if the device is class 1, there's minimal you have to do. If it's class 2, there's a lot more. If it's class 3, get ready, there's a ton. Excuse me for one second. And if you don't know what that is coming to them, it might be the case that they don't want the responsibility of having to figure that out, that they're willing to do whatever is necessary, but they don't want to prescribe that to you. It could also be there's many devices where entrepreneurs often think, oh, this is a lower classification. I've had so many people come to me and say, oh, this is a class 1 device, but it's going to have software that automates it. Well, there's a little thing in 21 CFR 820.30 that says if you have software automating the device, it automatically requires design controls, which is sort of bread and butter of a class 2 device. And suddenly the burden has gone up through the roof. So it may well be that they simply want you to take responsibility for that classification, especially when a CPAP, I think you said, is going to be a class 2 device. So accessories to it have the potential to become a class 2 device. Then the compatibility of those accessories with the device becomes a question and an issue, and all that has to be figured out. We do that at Into Being. There's any number of groups around that can do that kind of. We would also call it a regulatory analysis, but the formal letter is probably less important than an understanding of how it's going to be classified, what's going to be required to go along with it, and so I can talk to you about that, or any competent regulatory agency can as well. Does that help, Michael?
Yes, it sure does. It sure does.
All right. Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Let's see if we actually do have another question here, and since we do have time today, we'll bring if he's there and live. Looks like Matthew, you're live.
Hi there, Gene. I was just trying to ask a question. Is there ever appropriate to throw a substantial a flag after a substantial equivalence has ever been received, or if you feel like the process was maybe not was not the least burdensome, but you ended up receiving substantial equivalence anyway?
That's a great question. I would have to look. I'm not so sure that you can throw it afterwards, because you would have responded to the deficiency to get substantial equivalence. So let's say the agency comes back and says, here's a deficiency, or here's more information we would like. If you respond to that, you've sort of closed the window that was opened by that deficiency. So I don't think, but I would have to confirm that it's probably not even possible. I hear what you're saying, though. It's an interesting point, is just to go on record, just to put the stat in the FDA's database that, hey, yeah, we weren't so sure this one was going in the right direction. But again, if it gets resolved, there's nothing to throw a flag over, right? So like if they're saying, we don't think you're substantially equivalent, if they're hinting towards that, and then you resolve it, there's not going to be any material over which to throw that flag at that point. So I think that's probably the way that one's going to come down. But it's a great question. We appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
Let's see if we've got any others. Great questions today, folks. But another question here from Sam. Yeah, we got time today. This is a fun show today. I love it when we've got time to take open Q&A like this. Let's bring Sam on live if we can do that. There we go, Sam. I think you're live with us. Do we have you?
Hey, Gene. How are you?
Doing well. Welcome to the show. We're glad to have you and have your question. I sort of saw it there, but why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize. This isn't entirely relevant to the topic of today's discussion. We're going.
That's just fine. No, we love to answer questions. We always leave the last part of the show for this, and this is spot on, man.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering. This is my first time actually attending one of your webinars. These are fantastic. I had kind of looked through some of the older webinars that you guys have offered and see that this is probably relevant to an older one, but we're kind of moving the de novo route. And so we don't have like a direct market equivalent. And we're kind of going through the process of looking for standards that are sort of relevant to our device. Are there resources or methods for like seeking out which standards, ISO, IEC, et cetera, are going to be relevant to our device if we don't have a direct market equivalent?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, since we do have a few minutes here, we'll just do a live demo. This will be great training for everybody who's listening, because there really are some options out there to start to learn about that. I'm just going to bring a few things up here on my screen, and then I'll share it with all of you in the audience. So give me just 1 minute. So the first thing that I want to show you here, I'm going to do a screen share. So this is actually a website that we maintain that was developed internally at Into Being, and it's called pathsurveyor.com. It's free, and it's a single search bar interface to the FDA's database. This is a great place to start searching for things that are similar. So again, you said you're a de novo, but this is a great place to start searching. And as you start searching for things like, I don't know, we'll do patient warming here. And as this comes up, we're going to start to see devices that have been cleared in an area. Once you've seen those, you've got options. You can click on those to find out, oh, here's a submission summary for that particular device. Again, this is still in the 510K world. We haven't gone to the de novo world yet. You can find the product code. You can click on the product code and read about how the FDA is classifying that kind of a device, some historic clearance times for those 510Ks, some recently approved devices, some full submissions, et cetera. And so you can get to things like this. If there's a device that's kind of similar to what you're doing, you can then work your way down, and in these 510K summaries, you can find out what kinds of standards devices that are similar but not the same have used. That'll get you a little bit. But there's another database I want to show you. So use something like Path Surveyor to do research, to dig things up, to find similarities because I guarantee you that if you get into some of these, you will find that there are standards that do apply. But there's a more specific way to do this here, and I just need to bring this one up. Let me stop the share here for just a second and bring it up. And this is through the FDA's website themselves. I think this will be the thing that you're most looking for. Excuse me. This is the Recognized Consensus Standards Database on the FDA website. You can get it through a Google search to Recognized Consensus Standards. Also, I'm just going to take this and post it into the chat for at least this webinar. If we can do that, can we do that? Yep, so here's the link. It's going into the webinar there so that everyone can see it. And what this is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to start looking for standards through word searches and things like that. Now, is that going to come back with a lot of standards? Yes, it certainly will. But the cool part is that you can go through and you can read the summaries. And you can start to ask, does this standard apply? Does this standard not apply? And you'll start to be able to screen those down. I'll tell you, if your device has electrical components in it and it's patient contacting, the whole 60601 family of standards is most likely to apply. If it's a medical device, you're going to want to consider 14971, right? If it touches a patient, you're going to want to consider biocompatibility, right? 10993. And the list goes on and on. So what I would say is, through databases like these, through talking with folks like ourselves, sometimes it's just going to be a matter of, yeah, have you thought about 60601? Have you thought about 14971? Have you thought about 10993? They probably apply if you're a medical device, right? If there's software 62304, software lifecycle, or the FDA guidance. But I think what you're partly asking is more specific standards.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the reality is, if you're a de novo, the number of specific standards that you're going to find is going to start to go down because you're a de novo. There's not an industry out there supporting this device type. An exception to that would be, there are standards for standard connectors for breathing apparatus or for fluids or things like that. So let's say that you're piping fluids around, and you know that, then there's a good chance that we'd want to go look for standards, connector standards, right? Is this going to, if I take a Lure fitting, and I know it needs to connect to my device, am I doing that according to the standard? So that's the way we would sort of break that down. You're not likely to find standards that apply to your specific device because you're having to do a de novo for it anyways, and no one but you has thought about it. The generic parts of it that are unique, like fluid or air connections or things like that, there are standards, and we should dig into those. And then there's always those generic standards like 14971 and 60601, 10993, 62304 that if you have those components, the standard's going to apply, and it's just going to be sort of run of the mill in that regard. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for both those resources and taking the question. Again, not on today's topic, but
no,
super
Sam,
helpful.
I appreciate it, and honestly, I just want to take the moment to say thank you for doing that. I had to thank Diane Bowie the other day for jumping on with some announcements, and she was like apologetic, and like that's why we're here, is to connect people and get answers and stuff. So Sam, thank you so much for that and all of our questions today. Really great. We really appreciate it. I'll leave it open here for just another minute in case other questions pop up. I got to say, for all of those of you who haven't seen the show before, we don't show paramotor videos every week, so I don't know if that's a plus or a minus for you, but you'll have to come join us on a trip if you want to do more of that. Yeah, a note from Ken. There's someone who might have some more information on the de novo there, because she just got through one, so great stuff. Well, it looks like I'm not seeing any more questions today. We are nearly to the top of the hour. It is, at least where I am, a beautiful weekend. I hope you go out there and enjoy it, and we will see you next week. In the month of August, we are going to start talking about manufacturing, what you need to be thinking about if you are getting ready to manufacture your device, and hopefully talk to some manufacturers in the month of August. I do see one more question here. Is the Pathway site available online? Yes, it is. It is pathsurveyor.com. That is, we'll just post this in the chat, but for those who are listening in reruns, it is pathsurveyor, pathsurveyor.com. Here it comes in the chat. Be sure to grab that out before the show closes. I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for all of our questions, and hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.